The thing that I liked best when I asked Lucy about her bio to be included in the webinar assets is the fact that she said she was a storyteller. And how wonderful is that? So, welcome, Lucy. It's my pleasure to meet you. Hi, thank you for being here. So,
I'm
Lucy,
thrilled about it. Thank you.
thank you. Lucy lives in Brazil, so she agreed to wake up at the break of dawn for us. Thank you so much. We all thank you so much and are so grateful. Um, so Lucy is a teacher trainer, a storyteller, and she also runs a school in Florianopolis. So as I said, she lives in Brazil. I know that there's a thunderstorm going on in there at the moment. So in case we lose her, don't panic. We'll get her back, I promise. But I will just come up and tell you that we are getting her back. I'll remind you. So Lucy will be talking to us about the importance of storytelling and stories when we teach to young learners today. So over to you, Lucy, and thank you again for being here. Thank you all for attending as well.
Thank you, Frederica. Hello, good morning from Brazil. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today, and I hope that we have a great hour now, talking about stories, sharing some ideas, and yes, trying to find the best way to use and improve the stories that we have in our classrooms with our primary learners. So let me just start by sharing the plan. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the plan that we've got for the next 60 minutes. So we're going to start off with the power of a personal story, and I'll be sharing a little tiny personal story because the point about this is I think it's the best place to start connecting to stories and start thinking about being a good storyteller is first of all to think, what is my story? And in that little story, you'll have something that you can share with your students, and that's the key. That would be the first point. Then we're going to talk about the storytelling space, how you can organize it, and how you can make it a very interesting and motivating moment in your classroom. Then we'll talk about ways of telling stories, whether it's like a performance or whether it's using a book. We'll also look at visual thinking skills, those routines that help us to incentivize our students to give their ideas and their opinions and to activate this sort of critical and visual thinking that's so important. I'll give you a couple of story warm-ups as well, because this is something very useful to get students engaged and settled down for story time. I've got a lot of different musical instruments here by my side, of which I'd love to show you some things. And I'll talk a little bit about sound effects for stories. Also, how we can also make our students participate in the stories as like protagonists and storytellers themselves, and how that really keeps them engaged. And then I think you'll also see through what I'm going to say this morning that there are a lot of social emotional learning opportunities, and we'll identify some specifically as we go through the session. All right, so off we go. Now, I'll start by showing you a little picture of myself. I am about 7 years old here, and when I show this picture to my students, they're like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe it, teacher. Look at you, you're wearing a tie." And so that already generates all sorts of different things. But as soon as they see me, the age that they are, there's like a different connection that goes on. And they stop seeing me as a teacher and see me a little bit more as like a regular human being. So it's very nice. So here I am. My mum and dad were from Scotland, but we were born and brought up in England, and we lived in this farmhouse. There's the arrow to my bedroom window. And I used to sit on that little ledge looking out of the window and looking down into the garden. Sometimes there was snow would be there, but that was a place that I spent a lot of time looking out and thinking about life. And it's so nice to be brought up in a house with a garden and have countryside to run around with bicycles and climbing trees. So that was my upbringing, and I think a lot of the play and a lot of the sensory connections that I made in my childhood come from this place. So this place is a farmhouse, and it's very, very dear to my heart. So I like to show that to my students, because also it's in the English countryside, so very different to the houses here in Brazil. So then what happens next? Let me see. So there's a picture of my mum and dad. You can see my dad is wearing a kilt. And I have two sisters. One is Iona. She's the oldest one, and her name is actually an island off the coast of Scotland. And also my middle sister, Gia, is also the name of an island. So you're going to see that there are quite a few islands in my life as well. That's a little bit about them. Then, when I grew up, I must have been, I think, 19, I decided to go to London to study theatre because I wanted to do acting. So I went up to London and I studied in a theatre school there, and it was wonderful. I learnt so many things about, plays and voice and singing, and everything that I did there has been great for everything that I do in life, and particularly for the primary classroom. And after I graduated, I started working and I got a job in a theatre company. I also worked with theatre in education, which was really great too. So I got a job, and the director of the theatre company was from Brazil. And let me just move this down a little bit so I can see. Yes, so he was from Brazil. And he also came from an island. You see, there's the island of Florianopolis, and that's where I'm speaking to you today. It's a little tiny island in the south of Brazil, connected to the mainland by bridges. So I'm here on this island, but I left London in 1992. And this is another little bit of the story that I tell my students. When I left, I went to the airport, and my best friend Amanda turned up at the airport, and she bought me this little tiny box. And in this box was a present for me. And it was a beautiful silver locket. And on the back, she had engraved "Forever Friends" and the date. But lockets always have things inside. So if I open it, you'll see that there's a little tiny message. And this is what the message from my dearest friend said. Lucy, when you're in Brazil, just sometimes look at the moon and think of me, and you can be sure that I will be looking too and thinking of you. This is a very, very special transitional moment from moving countries. So off I went to Brazil. I had to learn how to speak Portuguese, and I had to find my way there, right? But before I went to Brazil, I decided to study teaching English as a foreign language. So I took the certificate, I put it in my backpack, and eventually I started teaching here in Brazil. And obviously I started teaching children. This is the beautiful island of Florianopolis. And I kind of thought that I was coming from the British Isles, one island to another island, it would be quite easy. But the culture differences are huge from a European country to Latin America. But I've been living here for a long time now, so I think I'm a little bit Brazilian already. It's a most beautiful place, and I feel very lucky about it. Here is a little picture of my little tiny school. It's in my back garden. And here we teach children from 6 to 16. We'd spend a whole afternoon with them, so we get a chance to work with projects, and we also use course books. But it's like a language laboratory for me. And it's also where I can tell stories to my students. So a lot of the way that I think my students have learnt English has been through using beautiful books and telling stories. This is a picture of my family. I have two daughters. Flora is the oldest one in the front, and then Emily is the younger one, and that's my Brazilian husband. So I have my special little family on this side of the globe as well. And together I have my street doggy, a rescue doggy. And the most beautiful thing about the choices that we make in life is that I think I've found my place in the world, which is really nice. So hopefully now that you've seen this little tiny slice of my life, you can feel that you know me a little bit better. And that's exactly the effect that it has on our students as well. So I'm sure that you can think of a little tiny story, or you have a photograph that you can share. And sometimes I like to get my students to draw a little road or a path on a piece of paper, and usually we do this with drawing. So they draw 4 or 5 little tiny memories that they can think of from when they were very little until the day of the class. So they're little tiny drawings, and then I get them to sit in pairs and exchange those little tiny slices of their life. This is a beautiful activity. You can do it with any age, depending on how you grade it. And also, if you, teachers, if you haven't told your own personal story, perhaps you can use this idea of drawing a road and little pictures to visually tell the story to your students. I highly recommend it. Righty-ho, off we go. So, can you remember, and just write it in the chat box, can you remember who were the people that told you stories as a child? Were they your parents, or perhaps a grandparent, or perhaps an older brother or sister? Tell me, who told you stories when you were little? Frederica, I can't see the chat box from the participants to see what they're saying. How do I do that? Click on public. Brilliant. Okay, I remember you told me. Oh, my mum, my parents, my aunt, grandparents, my dad, granny, mama. Great, great. It's so lovely, right? Immediately, when we think about stories, we have somebody in mind that used to tell us, yeah? You don't remember, but that's okay. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's not in your family circle, yeah? Or maybe you were the first one that told yourself a story, yeah? But that's the beautiful thing about telling stories to children, is making a connection, right? So here are some of my favorite stories. And when I was putting this slide together, whoops, I've gone too far. When I was putting this slide together, I kind of made an emotional connection to each story. And I think that's what children do a lot. When they like a book, they want you to read it over and over again. When they like a film, they want to see it over and over again. And mainly they want to do that because there is an emotional part of the story that they feel they want to see, and they want to experiment and connect with that again. So just for an example, the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, one of the parts that children like a lot that's a little bit scary is when the witch comes with the red apple to Snow White's door, right? So these are some of my stories, and as I said, they one is because my mum used to read the poems when we were young. Another is because they were scary stories. The Yellow Book from an Austrian writer. Flip Flop Secrets was because a frog stole a bicycle from the other animals in the forest, and I thought that was like, really, wow. A Necklace of Raindrops because the illustrations were so beautiful. Thursday's Child because it was about an orphan. So remember that when you're choosing a storybook for your class, think about what you think the emotional connection might be. And also, I'm going to give you some tips on the best ways to choose stories too. Okay. Let's have a little look about why stories are good for us. Okay, and I think you're going to agree with some of these things. So stories can improve listening and promote this lovely sense of well-being. Sometimes they can reach the subconscious and change behavior patterns, and that's because the moral of the story we should never spell out for them. Let the story seep into the children piece by piece, image by image, and they will work it out themselves. So good stories can sometimes modify challenging behavior and also increase concentration according to the ones that you choose. The other lovely thing they can do, they can increase self-esteem and self-confidence when you include the students in the storytelling, perhaps as a character or as a little chorus to chorus some of the repetitive words in the story. Slowly it builds up their confidence of reading in the second language. So it uncovers hidden talents, which I think is fantastic. And then also it can be cross-curricular. When you use stories, you can use stories that from different countries. You can use stories about geography, about art, about science. And it also introduces children to folklore and literature. So this is also beautiful. Remember always to include your local stories. If you can change them into English, include your local stories, because you're teaching your children about their beautiful country and their ancestors, etc. And also, they can provide a natural and relevant context for language. Yes. And develop concentration skills as piece by piece we offer the stories to the students, and they get into the routine and they start to understand what it's all about. Yes. Perhaps there's something in the book that they have themselves have done, or a character, or a loving grandmother, as they have a loving grandmother. So this is beautiful, these connections that they make. And I think for me personally, most of all, stories touch our emotions and they have an impact on us, as you can see when we think about the stories that we loved as children. Okay, great. So let me know if you use stories in your classroom. Do most of you use stories? Are you connecting to the webinar occasionally? Yes, sure. So you're connecting to the webinar today because you also use stories, not so much. Definitely. Great. I know that some teachers sometimes don't have time for stories, yeah, which is why a very simple anecdote, like we were saying, about yourself as a teacher can be very useful. Yes, okay, great. Yes, twice a month, excellent. Always, surely do. Okay, that's really good. Let's see how we can do more stories and improve on our stories, right? So let me just talk a little bit about the power of beautiful illustrations. There are hundreds of books, and in each of our different countries where we teach, there's probably like a story aesthetic, you know. If children tend to watch a lot of television, then they kind of connect to stories with a lot of cartoons and things, right? But especially for the younger learners, it's important for us to find very beautiful illustrations, okay? Because they vary so much. Let me give you some examples, right? So this image, I've shown it to my students and I'd say to them, what do you think about this? Usually they laugh a little bit, but they also say they've never seen a giraffe wearing lipstick. And this is a very girly picture. This is not necessarily a positive picture for the girl students and for any students in our classroom, because it's a caricature, right? It's an image for later on, not for the under sevens. So what should we give the younger students if we can? We need to give them the real and the beautiful and not the exaggerated and the stereotyped, okay? So you can see that those giraffes are much more beautiful than that one there, okay? So think about the images. Yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I totally agree with you. Yes, so this is really important. We don't always have beautiful picture books in our schools, but we can try to find something online, maybe, okay? Yes, they can help illustrations. That's why illustrations are so important. Exactly. They help to convey meaning, and they can help tell the story without the students who don't read getting worried about the words. Yeah. This is also, this is kind of one of my very favorite illustrators. Her name is Molly Brett, very English. And also look at the quality of that drawing, right? There's so many things going on. There are different shades of color. There's all sorts of things, right, that we can talk about. A lot of the time, our course books, due to the time it takes to write them and due to the resources and many other things, a lot of the course books that we have might look more like this with the animal pictures. But that doesn't mean to say all course books are like that, you know. When a course book is good, it has a variety of different images done in different ways, not just computer generated images, but like hand painted images, delicate images with different colors. So it is, yes, very careful. You have to choose them very carefully, I would say. Okay, if you can. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about, can you please try refreshing your page? Oh, okay. So I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the differences and the goods the positive qualities of using a book to tell a story versus the storytelling mode, okay? Because I do both, but I particularly connect to storytelling more theatrically because of my background. So what about using books? Let's have a look. You don't need to learn the story off by heart when you have the book in your hands. And you also don't need to worry about making mistakes in English. This is very good for the novice teachers who want to use storytelling but feel perhaps a little bit insecure with their language level sometimes. So reading shows that books are a source of interesting ideas. And when we hold books, when we're touching a book, it's kind of nice to do it with reverence, you know. When I'm using a book, I try never to fold the book, the hardcover right back. This actually is a book from my childhood, and funnily enough, it's one of my favorite ones. But it doesn't have any words written in it. It was given to me by my grandmother on my 7th birthday, and it's really gorgeous, but it doesn't have any words. So every time my mum read this story, it was slightly different every time. Yeah. And it also has these little flaps that flap over. So there's Shrubatina having a wash, and here she is sitting down to read her birthday cards that came through the letterbox. So the way that we handle books as we're using them to tell a story is also important. As we've said before, the pictures really help understanding. And this act of just watching the teacher take up a book, treat it with reverence, reading the story, it brings this magic to the young learners, okay? And another positive thing that we can also do when we're reading a story, always follow the words, if you can, with your fingers. I used to do that with my 2 daughters. They were both born here in Brazil, so they're Brazilian with an English mum. And when my youngest was 6 years old, we were in the dentist and she found a book by chance written in English, and she just picked it up and started reading it, and she read it perfectly. And at that point, I didn't really know that she knew how to read. She'd done it on her own, but that's because we had been reading bedtime stories for quite a number of years, and always, as I was reading in English, I would follow the word with my finger. So she knew the sounds, she knew the phonetic sounds, and it had gone in piece by piece. So children are amazing, aren't they? They're so clever. Now, what about this idea about telling stories with different things? Yes. So this is, it involves practice, obviously, and it involves a certain amount of confidence as a teacher. But if you find a story that you love and that you really want to tell your students, practice it at home, think about how you can jump it off the page, and it will be amazing. Let's look at the things that are amazing about this storytelling mode. So children feel that you're giving them something personal and something, you know, they always know when you've prepared a really good class for them, right? Let me just have a quick sip. So they always know when it's something that you've taken time over. And children these days, they're not used to this experience of hearing someone tell necessarily a story depending on the country where you are. So it can be really like, oh my goodness, teacher, what's that all about? Okay, so it can be very powerful. We can also modify the language when it's not in a storybook, that we change the language and we use it. We use the language that we know our students know. We use our body language as well, which they can read to understand the narrative. And as we're not, too connected to the book, we get to see all the faces, all the expressions, who's paying attention, who needs to be drawn into the story. So if you haven't, yes, intonation is also really important, your voice. We'll talk about that as well. So if you haven't tried this storytelling mode, perhaps choose a story that you've told in a book a number of times and think about ways that you can include objects and students helping you to make the story come alive. So there are the 2 kind of story modes. Now, Before I go on, I just wanted to share with you a framework that I like very, very much indeed. It's from a book called Between Form and Freedom by an American woman called Betty Staley. And she puts the qualities of childhood into these categories. Now, she says childhood is from 0 to 21, and it goes through 7-year cycles. So from 0 to 7, the child thinks through doing and learns through imitation, right? So imitation is really, really important as well, so that when you come into the classroom, you must think about the way you look, your gestures, your voice, because they imitate everything. As you can see, the little boy with the cat. So pre-primary teachers, you know, are goddesses or gods, yeah? So pay attention to that. From 7 to 14, she says, the child thinks in pictures and learns through feelings. And that kind of means that what they see is what they take on. Okay, so that's important. The images that we bring into the classroom, the content of the story, the message of the story, what it's saying, how gently it's saying it, right? And they're very, especially the 9.5 and 10.5-year-old students, they're coming out of that beautiful fantasy world and they're into the reality of the world, and that can be very painful for some of them. And so storytelling can be really therapeutic for them, right? So I recommend at least considering this a little bit. So from 14 to 21, the young person thinks conceptually and learns through intellect. Yeah, that's where like larger content comes in, wider context about the world are properly assimilated by students in school. Now, in terms of storytelling, let me just show you some of the qualities of desirable stories for each age range. Now, this is not set in stone, but this is like something for us to consider. So if the young child thinks through doing and learns through imitation, obviously stories with action that involve movement, routine, and things that connect them to their home life will be very, very beneficial for them, yes? Sometimes I like to, in my school, I like to have a carpet or something, a plant or something in my classroom that reminds them of that home environment, especially when you're going to tell a story. It has to be an intimate, cozy moment if possible, yeah? So if you are in a class of more than 20, 25, 30 students, try and find at least a way of organizing your tables and chairs in like a semicircle, at least to create that communicative and group feel of telling a story, okay? From 7 to 14, stories that involve a journey and this striving for a new horizon. Because what this age range, they need to understand that, for example, the 10 and 11-year-olds, they want to be like 14, 15, 16-year-olds, yeah? But if we find the right stories, we're going to teach them that everything is a process. Don't get worried about hurrying through it. Piece by piece, the world will be revealed, yes? So, for example, Jack and the Beanstalk is a very interesting story, yes? It has a rhythm and it has a challenge and it has, you know, different things that happen. It's like a journey. That's one that I like a lot, that I think most of you will know. Yes. High school students, yeah. So let's look at high school students, yeah? 14 to 21. So they're really intellectual. They understand concepts. So some of the best stories for this age range are going to be your biographical stories, right? That show strength and courage and this evolution of the soul. So, for example, The Diary of Anne Frank, perhaps Malala, all these young figures that are doing something in the world, striving to make the world a better place. All sorts of biographies, you know, can be interesting. Biographies about musicians, biographies about famous people, all sorts of things that bring this depth of evolution, of growing up, and also really important that they show, you know, positivity towards the world and, you know, ways of feeling like you have a place in the world, if you like, okay? So that's just a little framework that I personally like a lot. So I wanted to share that with you. Now, what about storytelling routines? Yes, great. Okay, been using champion runners for their own country. Oh, great. Champion runner stories for the 11-year-olds. Excellent. Yes. What about storytelling routines, though? You do use them? They really help, don't they? They help us to organize larger groups, get everybody focused on the storyteller, get things in the classroom organized, right? Any routines in the classroom are good, aren't they? But particularly for storytelling routines, it's lovely to make sure all the students know what to do and where to go, right? So let me share with you some of the things that I do with my students. So to make the storytelling environment interesting, engaging right from the door, sometimes I make a doorway curtain, and I've made a little tiny one here for you to see. But basically, you get a piece of paper, a long piece of paper that's the size of your doorway, and you can draw a picture on it, and then you cut it into strips. Let me show you this little one that I've done for you to see. Okay, so here I've painted on story time, and it's going to be stuck in the doorway of my classroom so that when the students come through the door, something interesting is going to happen today in the classroom, right? So we can draw pictures on the front, we can put vocabulary, we can write the title of a story, and we can also write on the back as the students leave the classroom as well. We can put happily ever after, the end. It's just a lovely way to separate the outside world of the school to the inside amazing world of your classroom. Like a home cozy thing, yes, and getting close. Perhaps you have a storytelling carpet that you unroll to show that students that now is going to be story time. Perhaps there's a corner in your classroom. If you don't have anything of that, you can create it, yes? Just think about the layout of your classroom and think about how you can gather your students to you, yes? Getting them close, organizing them so that they can see you clearly, they can hear you, they can see the book if you're telling a book, okay? Sometimes I like to darken the room, and sometimes I can in my little school. I know you can't in a lot of schools, but we light a candle at the beginning, and then we blow out the candle at the end of the story. So that's another thing. And like I've said before, stories are lovely before you, if you can tell songs and rhymes beforehand. So here are a couple of the ones I do. I've given you this image because this is something that I use sometimes as characters in a story, but also sometimes to use as a story warm-up. It's basically a piece of cloth. I have a lot of cloth in my classroom because we can make little puppets out of cloth, like you can see. We can also use cloth to imitate fire. We could perhaps use it as a cape to tell a story about a king or a queen. Perhaps the sun came up in the story. You know, cloth is the most amazing, versatile thing, you know. Perhaps there's a forest that you have to sit on in the story. So this particular piece of cloth we can make into a puppet like this, right? So you could take a screenshot of this maybe if you're interested, but basically you get a square piece of cloth, right, like that. You can follow the illustration. You fold it into a mountain, right? And then you tie a knot in the top of the mountain where the snow would fall, like that. This could be used as a little rabbit. Bling, 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 bling. Or when we tuck the ears in and we wrap it around our hand, leaving 2 fingers for the legs, we can also make it into, can you see that? A little person, right? And the beautiful thing about these kind of puppets is that they don't have faces. So according to the character, the most beautiful thing is that the students will imagine the face. Yeah. So for example, I have this little witch here. See? No face. So my 25 students in my class each one will have their own idea of what the witch looks like. Okay. So the simpler, the better. So there you have a little puppet. Yes. If any of you are interested and you really want this image afterwards, just send me an email and I can send it over to you, because it takes a little bit of practice to get it wrapped around your hand, but it's entirely possible. So let's say that I will use my piece of cloth or another little puppet. This is one I've got called Sophia. She's really sweet, and she has trousers that are from gloves. And so I put my 2 fingers into her trousers like that, and she can walk. So this is a little warm-up activity. I make a tree with my hand, and it goes like this. There was a little girl climbing up a tree, so, so high you can see. She jumps from branch to branch, and down she falls. Ouch! I've hurt my knee. Can you put some cream on my knee, please? Thank you. And can you put on a Band-Aid? Oh, thank you. But you know, Sophia is very brave, and so what did she do? She decided to climb the tree again. There was a little girl climbing up a tree, so, so high you can see. She jumps from branch to branch. Look, what can she see? So now I elicit some of the words that I'm going to need for my story from the students. So I say, what can you see? What can Sophia see from the top of the tree? And so maybe they'll say sky, trees, birds, flowers, our classroom. She can see us. And then Sophia can say, yes, yes, but I can see a castle. Oh, a castle. Or I can see food. Can you see food? Can you tell me some of the food? And then maybe they're going to say an apple, an orange, a banana. Whatever it is, there is always a way of eliciting the vocabulary that the students need. And this is a beautiful way to start your story, a very simple way. Okay, now I've got to move on a little bit. That is one of the warm-up activities that I like to use, okay? I hope you got the idea of that. So here we're going to talk a little tiny bit about this thing of visual thinking routines, okay? This is a flexible framework, and this really enriches the learning experience, yes? And this is what we can use when we have the front cover of our book or the first image of the story in our course book. We can use it to incentivate children to connect to the story, to activate the schema of things that they already know, and to also lead thinking a little bit further. And so, for example, let me show you an image. This would be an image before the story. So this exactly to get the students to think about what the story might be about. Now, you can see that in the previous slide, we have the routine is see, think, and wonder. Okay. And so we're going to ask certain questions that are going to help our students, first of all, to see, to say what they see. Secondly, to think about that, and then thirdly, to lead the thinking a little bit further, to ask them, oh, I wonder this and I wonder that. Okay, so let's have a look at that framework. For example, we can say to them, what can you see in that picture? And they will start to tell you. Yeah, they'll start to tell you things individually. They might start to tell you things as a group. And the social emotional learning quality here is for them to listen to each other, put up their hand, agree, etc., disagree, whatever. But it's a collective moment. And also in this first part, when we're talking about what can you see, we also have to make sure that we give them enough time and we don't feed them the answers that we want to hear, yeah? So we'll use things like, can you see anything else? And we'll point to things, what's that? And then we'll ask them, well, what do you think about that? Yeah? Do you think these people are outside or inside? Yeah. I wonder if that girl's, I mean, is that girl is it a girl or is it a woman? What do you think? Where do you think they're going? Yes. And then what does that make you wonder, you know? I wonder where they got those bananas. Yeah? Do you think those bananas are real? I wonder if they're real. I wonder if they're happy. I wonder how old the little child is. Okay? So you can see that there's like a slow building up of open-ended questions for the students to answer. And this is also another way where they get connected into the story. Okay? So I'm going to show you just a couple of stories, okay, because these are stories from the Global Stage book, of which I was an author. And I just wanted to share with you a few of the strategies that we have that help students, you know, especially with their early reading skills. So this, for example, is just the first image of a non-fiction story. And you can see what I was talking about, the quality of the illustration. In this particular one, the paper is like got a grainy feel to it. It's different from some of the other images. And it also brings this particular image, it also brings this sort of sense of peace and calm, right? You're going to see two little boxes here. Yes. Do you think easy pose is easy? Right. So they're going to give their opinion. It's a little non-fiction story with yoga poses, right? And it also, as you tell the story, you can get the students to do the poses. Yeah. So the other box on the other side is just a little call out between different uses of English from different countries. So we can use the see, think, wonder strategy and routine, not just for fiction, but also for non-fiction as well, right? It all depends on the quality of the questions that you're going to ask. But this is a very nice one because it involves the students straight away. Okay. Let me share this one with you, okay? This is a poem about a little girl who is in a storm, right? Can you see? So you'll see the first image there. You might want to elicit this word from the students. Now, when the students aren't reading quite yet, they're going to be speaking in their first language, which is completely fine. And we're going to take what they say in their language and we're going to reformulate it into English in very simple words and simple structures for them. But it's really important that they get their ideas out, yes? And piece by piece, as they learn the words, they're going to be able to get those ideas out each time more in English. So for this particular story, the first thing I would do was I would just read it through the whole way. And then what I would do, having explored the images, I might say, where's the little girl? And they'll say, oh, she's outside. And what's the weather like? There's lightning and storm. What else can you see? It must be windy because the trees are bending, right? And now in the second image, where is the little girl? Oh, she's inside. Who else is inside with her? Who's that there? Is that Dad? Yes, that's probably Dad. And what's Dad doing? Dad's cooking the supper probably. And this is another very important thing, you see. Images tell everything. And if we want to have a more equal world and a world where everybody can do everything, it's really important for us to have an image of a dad cooking the soup in the kitchen, because you know what? Dads can cook. A lot of dads are amazing dads and they help around the house and they do everything together equally as women do. So these tiny little details, every single thing is a teaching mechanism. Okay, so the little girl is at home, and then in the next image, what's happening now? Okay, on this side, she's playing with her brother and her mum. They're playing a board game. They're inside. They've made a little den. Is it still raining outside? Yes, it's still raining. And then in the fourth image, exactly, make the students predict what's happening. Yes, she's going to go to sleep. Yes, what's she doing? There's a cultural connection there. Can you see? She's counting sheep to get to sleep, to help her relax. Have you ever done anything like that? So this is also a beautiful image that shows that lovely moment for students. So socially, emotionally, it's a lovely moment where you go from the waking world into the sleeping world, and there's so much love in that image. And this is really lovely too. So let's go back to this one, and let me give you some ideas of how we can include our students. You might have already seen that in this poem, there are some words repeated. My home is warm, my home is dry, my home is safe. It's repeated all the way through the poem. So I would definitely use this to include the whole group of my students in the story. And I perhaps would add some movements as well. For example, my home is warm, my home is dry, my home is safe. This particular movement for young children does give a sense of security as you cross the hands over the heart. So I would teach them this and ask them every time this part comes in the poem for them to read it together, to recite it together and do the movements. Like one of the teachers mentioned before here in the chat box, your voice is really, really important. That's why sometimes you have to practice at home before you come into the classroom, because your voice will give atmosphere. Okay, so if I just read the story out, the clouds are grey, the tall trees sway, a storm is near, it's completely different than if I read like this. The clouds are grey, the tall trees sway. A storm is near, a storm is here. I want to run away. Now, I spoke to you earlier as well about sound effects, and I was very lucky a while ago to find an instrument that makes the sound of thunder and lightning. It looks like this, right? It's basically a drum, and this is a spring. And as you move the spring, it makes a sound. Let me see if you can hear it. So that's the sound of the thunder, and the lightning is like this. Yeah, it's kind of cool, isn't it? Yeah, wow. But you know what? Another lovely way that you can make the rain with your students, the sound of the rain, you give them each a piece of rough paper, one in each hand, and they can do like this. Yeah, for heavy rain and light rain. And it's gorgeous because it involves them in the story. It's totally sensorial and very, very easy to set up and do. Yeah, so they can make the sound of the rain in the story. Another thing you can do is you can use hand movements to do like a pitter-patter. Like that. Sound effects are great because you can involve your students in your story without them worrying too much about the language, even though the language is all going in. They're not losing any English there, but piece by piece, they're getting involved in the story. So other things I also have, for example, I have this lovely little 3-bar glockenspiel. Makes this lovely sound. I can also use it if I'm going to ask my students to turn a page or for a magical moment in the story. Or if I want them to quieten down, I might play it and then I might say, as soon as you hear the sound stop, put up your hand silently. Yeah, this is a great instrument. You can usually find it in shops that sell yoga materials or incense. It's a very simple instrument. Here's another one that I have that I use for maybe for a character that's walking in the forest. Yeah, so we have a mini interval of music and then we come back to using the language. If you like storytelling, you need your storytelling toolkit. So wherever you go from now on, try and search out for little things or make little shakers with rice. Yeah, here's one I found as well from the north of Brazil. Yeah, it's great for like something's going to happen or somebody's going up and down in the story. Okay. Brazil is a great country for percussion instruments. Here's another one. It's called a reco-reco. Let me just show you. I love these cultural things. And it goes, this is the sound. But I also discovered that it makes the sound of like creaky walking for like a scary story or something for Halloween. Yeah. Young children, they are so sensorial that these sort of things work very, very well. And if you do have, the talent for music, I don't have necessarily a talent for music. I, for example, only know one song on the recorder, and this is it. It's the only song I know on the recorder, but that doesn't mean to say I'm not going to use it, yeah? Anything that you can think of, body percussion, your own voice telling a song, all these things are incredibly rewarding, and they draw the students into your story, and they make the whole storytelling process so much more collaborative, okay? So exactly, I would tell the story and I would get the students going back to the poem. I would carry on like this. The strong, the strong wind roars. The cold rain pours. I want to hide. I go inside. I shut and lock the door. And then I would get everybody. My home is warm. My home is dry. My home is safe. Thunder goes boom. Light fills the room. I feel no fear. I'm safe in here. I hide in my bedroom. My home is warm. My home is dry. My home is safe. Now it's time to sleep. I can count some sheep. The storm is there, but I don't care. Soon I am asleep. Good night, Mum. Good night, Dad. Good night, Storm. So you see, as the story starts, our voices are slightly louder, and as they come to the conclusion, our voices go quiet and they conclude the story. You don't have to lose the atmosphere when you finish the story. You want your story to keep reverberating within the young child way after story time is over. And if you practice and you do these stories with as much love and attention as possible, I promise you that these stories that you're going to tell will be very, very memorable. So let me just see what I've got here. Here are some of the ways of exploring the reading, and also this is also incentivizing the students to use some of the language chunks that they might have heard. This one, for example, I would put up the sentences and I would ask the students what happened first. Yeah, so hopefully they'll say there's a storm, and then what's next? The girl is outside, right? Yes, she goes inside, she locks the door, she hides in her bedroom, and she falls asleep. So the reading strategy here is about sequencing. So I can visually help my students. And if they don't understand the words, obviously I can lock the door. I can use mime to infer meaning as well. So as we explore the story, we can explore the story in lots of different ways, right? We can do like a little mini comprehension with questions. We can ask them to make the questions or answer the questions. So very simply, why does the girl want to run away? Because there's a storm, right? And what does she shut and lock? What's that? The door, that's right. What sound does the thunder make? Boom! The little ones love making sounds, especially the boys. And which room does she fall asleep in? It's not the kitchen, right? No, it's the bedroom. And how does she get to sleep? That's very funny. She counts sheep. Exactly. So we can always make the delving into the story interesting. We could also have, for example, on the floor of the classroom, the word storm written and the word home, and then we give out little pieces of paper with the words that we can categorize. So which are the words that deal with the storm? Dark, thunder, wind, and which of the words are connected to home? Dry, inside, warm and safe. And always think about going beyond. We can also get our students to add their own words, because maybe there are other things that they're thinking about. So we can get them to add words, another word for storm. Who can tell me another word for storm here that's not here? Anybody there? Another, yeah, we can use the vocabulary as well for the target, yes. Good. Who can tell me another word for storm that's not here on this list? Or another word for home? Heavy, a very heavy storm. Perfect, we could add that word. A hard storm, a hard rainstorm. What about another word? Nice. Okay, noisy, typhoon. Yes, hurricane, scary. What about a word for home that encompasses the feeling of home? What else could we have? Home, sweet home, family, cozy. Yes, we've got that one. That's lovely. Yeah, shelter. You see? So I'm sure the students will come up with their own words as well. Excellent. Thank you for so many helpful tips here, people. And then this is the last one here. This is how we can explore the social emotional learning that students have experienced through the poem, through the story. So we give them these two little boxes, and we get them to draw, or if they can write, they can write. We get them to draw, what things are you afraid of in one box, and what makes you feel safe? So they'll draw those, and then we'll also get them into little pairs or little tiny groups for them to show their ideas and talk about their ideas. So very social emotional, very communicative task. So we're taking the story one step beyond each time. Do you think that's doable? Personalized responses, exactly. Exactly. Always involving the students, like they're the protagonists and we're just the facilitators of their learning, right? Exactly. Yes, I'm glad you liked that one. Excellent. So just to conclude then, about all the things we've spoken about, it's almost like an hour isn't enough time to do everything, right? But I hope that we've had a little tiny, a kind of synopsis of all the possibilities, okay? So remember to find ways to lift your story off the page and also use the story sequence to support your teaching. There's always something in a story that you can draw out and include the students, be it a word, be it a movement, okay? Another thing is, always try something new, especially for those of you who are storytellers. Remember just to try something that you haven't tried. Maybe it's going to be that you're going to use, you know, one of your little instruments. Perhaps it's just going to be something like that, but it's at least something new. And I think the most important thing for us all as teachers and lovers of working with primary, let's let the magic of the storytelling take over and take our teaching to a whole new level. These modern students, you know, that's what they want. They want things that instigate them, that excite them, and that connect to them emotionally. And they want to be in charge of their learning. So I think storytelling is saying it's like 100% one of the most fantastic tools for primary teachers. So I would like to thank you so much for being here, wherever you are in the world. I'm glad you love the ideas. Like I said, if you need anything, you can send me an email. I can send you the picture of how to make the puppet. But many, many thanks.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was such an amazing session. So can you hear me and
Great.
see me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
That's great. So first of all, thank you so much for, on behalf of everyone here at Macmillan. I so wanted to, shrink back into an old, a small child, and come to, school with you because it was amazing, absolutely. And I've seen like people, in the office that were watching the webinar, going around the office and being like, "Oh, you have to watch this afternoon session because it's just amazing." So well done.
Oh,
Thank you so
I'm
much.
so glad. It's a
Um,
huge pleasure.
Thank you all, everyone, for attending. Thank you so much. It was really brilliant. And you will all get a certificate for attending. In case you were wondering, it will be sent automatically to your email box within 2 working days. And before we actually go to questions, because I'm sure that you have so many questions for Lucy, I saw one question popping up in the chat box, and it was, where can we find these pages, this story? So here you go. This is Global Stage. This is the book that Lucy helped writing. She actually took care of the literacy part of the book. Of course she did. Who else? You can find it at the link that's the first one on screen, macmillanenglish.com catalog, and go to global stage. This is it, global stage. So you will find it on our website, and you can find all of these slides in your email box within 2 working days, because we will be sending them out as a handout. You can find more ELT resources on our website as well in the blog and resources section, and you can register for upcoming webinars. Yes, on our website, indeed, Vanessa. Thank you for asking. Our next webinar will be on the 12th of February. It will be delivered by Tom Kittle. He's the director at NILE, and he's been working there for quite a long time. Yeah, it's going to be about mediation, which is a really interesting topic in ELT. And we'll also have an online conference on the 4th of March. So in less than a month, do register. You will find the link here. It's the third line. So macmillanenglish.com/webinars. And yes, you will all get a certificate and the slides sent to your email box automatically. So if you have any questions, we can, ask them to Lucy.
Yeah, I can see one about using stories in adult classes.
Yes.
Fantastic as well. Let's imagine that we have an adult who's a beginner and you want to use a story, right? Well, obviously you'd have to choose the story very carefully, where you know that the language will be accessible to the adult, interesting to the adult, perhaps a little tiny bit above their level to give it that challenging edge. But I think a way of using a story for adults would be to take it in sections. Take the first paragraph, read it, talk about it, analyze it, underline words, chop out words, and get them to pop them back into the story. There's lots of different ways, and I think the most important about choosing a story for an adult would be get to know the adult. What do they like? What do you think makes them motivated about learning English? Yeah. So that would be a way of using stories for adults. And I think, like I started the workshop as well, personal anecdotes. Everybody has a story to tell. So that's another possibility too. Yes, I'm on Twitter as well. What's my Twitter handle? I think it's just Lucy Crichton. I've got Instagram as well, if you're interested. Lucy A. Crichton. Let me have a look at my Twitter thing. I think it's just, just Lucy Crichton. I've also got a page on Facebook, and I've also got information. I always post pictures of what I'm doing in the classroom too. So either on Lucy A. Crichton on Instagram, or on The Secret Garden, which is the school that we have here. Thank you so much. It's lovely comments. It's such a privilege. Thank you. I'm really glad that you found it interesting. Excellent.
And there's also someone else that says hi, and it's Annie. There was a comment in the chat box earlier. She said you worked for a course for Macmillan a few years ago together, and she said hi.
Yes. Annie Altamirano. She was you see how we get into writing stories? She was like a mentor for me. I did my very first writing assignment with Annie, and she was so generous and so helpful. She had more experience with me, and she helped me to understand how we write stories for primary course books. So I have a lot to thank her for. I'm so glad she popped up here.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know this, but I just saw the comments and I was like, yeah, I'm sure she'll love that. So hi, Annie, from us as well. And there was another question that popped up that I'm really curious about. And it's, what would you do with those children that do not have as much fantasy, or whose fantasy needs to be poked, let's say? What would you do with them? Yeah.
This is an excellent question, because we do have children, who haven't had a lot of imaginative play through their early years. So the way of opening the little magic door to get them in would be to turn them into stage managers for you. So, for example, you might like to have one sitting next to you who's in charge of the instruments and passing you the instruments that you need in the story. Or perhaps you might have somebody who is going to move the piece of cloth next to you. Or perhaps that student is in charge of organising the chairs or the special carpet where children are going to sit. I think you can always involve these students. If they're not like connected to the fantasy part straight away, get them into the sort of classroom management organisational side of telling a story. They're going to feel included. They're going to feel important. The pressure of them getting into the story is going to be taken away, as they're going to be your helpers. But, you know, the magic thing about being a helper, even if you are, you know, if you are sitting next to me holding the recorder, you're still listening to the story, and you're listening, and you know the moment you're going to pass me the recorder. So I think piece by piece, those students will get into stories and storytelling. But you have to be clever in finding ways to involve them in the organisation. Otherwise, they might be disruptive, they might be troublesome, they might have difficulty in concentrating or sitting down. So the secret is, let them be your helpers.
That is a really, really great tip. So thank you so much. And
Thank
you know,
you.
thank you again for a brilliant session. Thank you to everyone who attended. And I also want to thank Mike Riley, who works here at Macmillan and is the person behind the
Yeah.
entire webinar program. We wouldn't have the webinars without
Yeah.
Mike. So thank you, Mike.
Lots of love. Lots of love to Mike.
Yeah, always
Thank
lots of love to Mike.